The Alpha King had survived wars, curses, betrayals, and winters so brutal they buried entire roads beneath ice. But the night Kalen Blackthorn opened the wrong door and caught the scent of a trembling maid, his wolf froze for 10 seconds and whispered, "She's mine." Rain had been falling over Blackthorn Palace since sunset, soft and silver, tapping against the high windows like careful fingers. The old stone halls smelled of wet roses, candle wax, polished wood, and the distant smoke of kitchen fires. In the grand ballroom below, nobles laughed beneath golden chandeliers, while servants moved around them like quiet shadows, carrying trays of wine, tea, and delicate cakes that looked too pretty to survive a single bite. Alara Vale had spent the whole evening trying not to become part of anyone's complaint. At 23, she had learned that an Omega maid survived best by being useful, quiet, and slightly invisible. Unfortunately, invisibility became difficult when one was carrying a tray of tea, stepping backward, and apologizing to a curtain at the same time. "I'm sorry," she had whispered to the curtain after bumping into it. A young footman had seen her and nearly laughed into the soup. By the end of the banquet, her simple gray dress was damp with rainwater, tea, and one tragic spot of raspberry cream that had somehow landed on her sleeve. Alara did not know how. The dessert had been on the other side of the room, which made the whole thing feel unfairly personal. The nobles never noticed her unless something went wrong. The other maids noticed her only when they wanted someone to blame. She was gentle, too gentle, according to Mrs. Alder, and clumsy enough to make teacups nervous. But when a younger maid had nearly dropped an entire tray in front of Lady Marceline Voss earlier that evening, Alara had stepped forward and taken the blame before the girl could be dismissed. That was how the raspberry cream had found her sleeve. Behind her, two maids giggled as she carried the empty tray back through the servants' corridor. "She could trip over moonlight," one whispered. Alara lowered her eyes, but she did not cry. She had been called worse things than clumsy, useless, plain, too soft, too kind for her own good. She had heard those words so often that they had worn grooves into her heart, but somehow, they had never hardened it. When she reached her tiny room beside the abandoned greenhouse, she released a tired breath as if she had been holding it all evening. The room had once been a storage space, forgotten behind a half-sealed corridor and an old stone wall thick with ivy. Mrs. Alder had let her sleep there after the servant quarters grew overcrowded the previous winter. It was small, but it was hers. A narrow bed stood beneath a cracked window. A chipped blue cup held wildflowers she had rescued from the garden path. One little pear blossom plant leaned toward the glass, stubbornly alive despite having no business blooming in autumn. "You and me both," Alara murmured to it. She closed the door, set the tray down, and peeled off her wet apron. The air inside smelled faintly of lavender soap, damp cotton, and the pear blossom petals she dried beneath her pillow. Outside, rain whispered through the greenhouse vines. Somewhere far above, thunder rolled across the mountains surrounding Stormfang Kingdom. That same thunder had followed Alpha King Kalen Blackthorn all evening. Hidden from the ballroom, hidden from the ministers, hidden from every noble family trying to push a daughter toward his throne, Kalen moved through a forgotten passage behind the palace walls with one hand braced against the stone. His curse burned beneath his skin like black fire. It always worsened after long council days, after too many voices, too many expectations, too many people looking at him and seeing only crown, command, and power. His wolf had been clawing at his control since dusk. "Shift," the wolf growled. "Not here," Kalen thought. The passage had been built generations earlier as an escape route for kings in danger. Over time, nearly everyone forgot it existed. Kalen never did. For years, whenever the wolf inside him grew too restless, or the old war curse dragged him toward losing control, he came here to breathe, where no one could see him tremble. He thought the room at the end of the passage was still empty. It had always been empty. Inside that room, Alara reached for a clean dress, but the wet sleeve stuck to her wrist. "Oh, come on," she told the fabric softly. "We discussed this." The fabric did not cooperate. She tugged once, lost her balance, bumped the chair, apologized to the chair, and finally managed to free one arm. She stood there in her plain underdress, hair loose, cheeks flushed, holding the damp work dress like it had personally betrayed her. That was when the hidden door opened. A narrow panel in the stone wall shifted inward, with a tired creak, spilling cold corridor air into the room. A tall man in a dark coat stepped through, rain in his black hair, one hand still braced against the wall as if he had been fighting pain. Alara froze. He froze. For one heartbeat, The room became impossibly still. Then Alara gasped, grabbed the wet dress, and held it to her chest. "I am so sorry," she blurted. The man turned his face away at once. "No, I am sorry." His voice was low, rough, and controlled, but something in it trembled beneath the surface. Alara noticed his silver eyes only for an instant before he looked aside. They were too bright, too wild, like moonlight caught in a blade. "I didn't know anyone used this room," he said. "I didn't know there was a door there," Alara whispered, then immediately wished she had said something wiser. The corner of his mouth moved, almost like he wanted to smile. Then her scent rose. It happened because she was frightened, embarrassed, and trying very hard not to drop the dress again. Warm pear blossoms after rain, lavender soap, a trace of honeyed milk. Beneath it all, something older stirred, soft and silver, like moonlight hidden under folded cloth. Kalen's shoulders locked. The curse under his skin went silent. Deep inside him, the black wolf that had been tearing at his control went utterly still. Kalen Blackthorn, Alpha King of Stormfang, had faced armies without flinching. He had silenced council chambers with one glance. Yet in that tiny room, before a trembling Omega maid who did not even know his name, his wolf whispered only one thing. "She's mine." Kalen inhaled once, slow and shaken. Alara misunderstood completely. "Oh no," she said, horrified. "Does it smell like raspberry cream? I swear that was not my fault." This time, the man truly almost smiled, but his eyes flashed silver. He stepped back into the hidden passage before instinct could drag him closer. "Lock your door tonight, Miss Vale." She blinked. "How did you know my name?" He did not answer. The panel closed softly, leaving only rain, lavender, and her racing heart behind. Alara stood frozen for several seconds. Then, slowly, she looked down. On the stone floor near the hidden door was one enormous wet paw print. A wolf's paw print, much too large to belong to anything ordinary. Outside the wall, Kalen pressed one hand to the cold stone, breathing hard as his wolf stirred again, no longer violent, only certain. "Go back," it whispered. She was trembling. By morning, Alara had convinced herself that the paw print had been a trick of rain, fear, and a very long evening. Unfortunately, the palace floor disagreed. The mark was still there when sunlight slipped through her cracked window, wide and dark against the gray stone. Alara crouched beside it with her hair still messy from sleep and stared as if politeness might make it explain itself. "You are not helpful," she whispered to the paw print. The paw print remained silent. A knock sounded at her door. Alara jolted so hard she bumped her shoulder against the bedpost. "Ow, sorry." She was not sure whether she had apologized to the bed or the universe. When she opened the door, Mrs. Alder, the head housekeeper, stood outside with a face usually reserved for broken china and disobedient laundry. "Alara Vale," she said, "you have been summoned." Alara's stomach dropped. By whom? Mrs. Alder's lips pressed thin. His Majesty. For one small, hopeful second, Alara thought perhaps there was another His Majesty somewhere in the palace. A minor one, a decorative one. Unfortunately, Stormfang Kingdom had only one king. The walk to the eastern receiving room felt longer than winter. Servants glanced at her from doorways. A footman whispered something and immediately pretended to polish a vase. Alara kept her hands folded so no one would see them trembling. She expected anger. She expected punishment. She did not expect to find the silver-eyed stranger standing near the window in a dark formal coat, looking entirely like a man who belonged to every crown, banner, and frightened whisper in the kingdom. Alpha King Kalen Blackthorn. Alara nearly forgot how knees worked. "Your Majesty," she breathed, lowering into a clumsy curtsy so fast that one foot caught the edge of the rug. Kalen moved before anyone else noticed. One strong hand caught her elbow, steady and warm. The contact lasted only a second. It was enough. Heat moved through Alara's wrist, soft as sunlight under skin. Across from her, Kalen's silver eyes sharpened. His wolf rose inside him, not with violence, but with a quiet, stubborn satisfaction. "Cold," the wolf murmured. Kalen released her carefully. Alara stared at the floor. "Forgive me." The rug attacked. For half a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Then, Kalen's mouth curved, faint but real. Mrs. Alder looked as if the roof had opened. "I summoned you," Kalen said, his voice calm, "because I owe you a formal apology." Alara lifted her head. "Me?" "Yes." Several servants waiting along the wall became very interested in breathing quietly. Kalen turned slightly, allowing his voice to carry. "Last night, I entered a private room through an old passage without permission. Miss Vale did nothing wrong. Ilara blinked. Mrs. Alder blinked. Somewhere near the door, a tray rattled in a maid's hands. The Alpha King had just apologized to a maid. Publicly. Ilara's cheeks warmed so quickly she wanted to hide behind the nearest curtain, but there were no friendly curtains within reach. You do not need to apologize, Your Majesty, she said softly. I should have known about the passage. Kaelin looked at her for a long moment. No, you should have been safe in your own room. The words settled over her like a blanket she had not known she needed. Ilara swallowed. For years, she had been blamed for things she did not break, things she did not spill, things she could not prevent. Hearing the king place responsibility anywhere but on her made her chest ache in a strange, tender way. Kaelin glanced toward Mrs. Alder. The hidden passage beside Miss Vale's room will be sealed by evening. Until then, guards will be posted outside the greenhouse corridor. Yes, Your Majesty, Mrs. Alder said quickly. Ilara's eyes widened. Guards? Kaelin's expression remained serious. For your safety. Her voice came out small. I am not very important. The room went still again. Kaelin's gaze softened, but his voice turned low enough to silence every whisper. You are under my roof, he said. That makes your safety important. Ilara did not know what to do with that, so she nodded, then accidentally nodded twice more, as if agreeing with herself. Kaelin watched her leave, and the lonely part of him, the part hidden beneath crown and command, felt something ease. As the door closed behind her, his hand tightened around the back of the chair. Inside him, the wolf had not moved on. Her wrist was cold, it said. Kaelin closed his eyes briefly. Fix it. That night, a folded royal cloak appeared outside Ilara's door. It was dark, warm, and far too fine for someone like her to touch. It carried the scent of cedar smoke, winter air, and something faintly wild beneath the cloth. No note came with it. No servant explained it. The two guards outside the greenhouse corridor refused to meet her eyes. Ilara stared at the cloak for a full minute. Then she whispered, That is not suspicious at all. The rain returned harder than before. It swept across Blackthorn Palace in silver sheets, rattling the greenhouse glass, and turning every garden path into a ribbon of dark water. Most of the palace slept beneath warm blankets and heavy velvet curtains, but Ilara sat awake in her little room, with the royal cloak around her shoulders and a candle burning low beside the pear blossom plant. She had tried to sleep. She had also tried not to think about Alpha King Kaelin Blackthorn apologizing to her in front of half the staff. Neither attempt had gone well. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered his hand around her elbow, steadying her before she fell. Warmth had moved through her skin where he touched her, gentle and strange, like her body had recognized a song her mind had never heard. That is enough, she whispered to herself. Kings do not become life problems because they have nice hands. The pear blossom plant offered no opinion. Then something scratched at her door. Ilara froze. The sound came again, slow, heavy, not a mouse, not the wind. A low huff followed. Her candle flame bent sideways. Ilara stood carefully, grabbed the nearest weapon she could find, and discovered it was a wooden hairbrush. Oh, very threatening, she whispered. She opened the door an inch. A giant black wolf stood in the corridor. Rain dripped from his thick fur onto the stone floor. His silver eyes glowed softly in the dim light, intelligent and exhausted. Across his broad chest, a pale crescent mark curved through the darkness of his coat. Ilara forgot to be afraid. You, she breathed. The wolf stared at her. You made the paw print. The wolf blinked once. Thunder rolled beyond the greenhouse roof. The creature shivered, only slightly, but Ilara saw it. Beneath all that size and power, something in him looked worn down, as if the storm outside had found a way beneath his skin. Her heart softened before common sense arrived. Oh, you poor thing. The wolf's ears tilted back. Ilara frowned. Do not look offended. You are standing in my hallway soaked like a dramatic carpet. A sound rumbled in his chest. It was not quite a growl. It sounded suspiciously like disagreement. Ilara opened the door wider. Fine, not poor, very majestic, extremely damp. The wolf stepped inside. Immediately, he seemed too large for the room. His shoulder nearly brushed the hanging herbs. His tail knocked lightly against the chair. The chair wobbled. Ilara caught it just in time. Please do not fight my furniture. It is old and has very little confidence. The wolf looked at the chair, as if considering mercy. Inside that powerful body, Kaelin Blackthorn was fighting a battle far worse than any border war. The curse burned under his skin, dragging his human thoughts beneath the wolf's instincts. He had shifted in the hidden corridor to avoid hurting anyone. He had meant to run into the storm. Instead, his wolf had come here. To her. Elara fetched a towel from the shelf and approached slowly. I'm going to dry you, all right? No biting. I bruise easily, and Mrs. Alder will ask questions. The wolf lowered his head. That simple trust nearly broke something open in her chest. She rubbed the towel over his wet fur with careful hands. The room filled with the scent of rain, cedar smoke, and beneath it, something wild and lonely. Her own scent rose in answer, pear blossoms and warm milk, softening the air between them. The wolf's breathing slowed. Elara smiled. There, much better, Mr. Grumpy. His head lifted sharply. She pointed at him. Do not argue. You arrived uninvited, soaked my floor, judged my chair, and looked offended by compassion. Mr. Grumpy Fitz. For one impossible second, the great wolf's tail thumped once against the floor. Elara gasped. You liked that? He looked away. She laughed softly, and the sound warmed the tiny room more than the candle ever could. Later, when the storm deepened, the black wolf lay across her doorway like a living wall. Elara curled beneath her blanket, watching him through sleepy eyes. A cold draft slipped through the poorly sealed window. Before she could shiver twice, the wolf stood, crossed the room, and placed his enormous body between the bed and the cold. Elara blinked at him. Did you just block the wind? The wolf looked away with great dignity. Her heart softened again. Good night, Mr. Grumpy, she whispered. His silver eyes opened halfway. For the first time in years, Kalen's wolf rested without pain. By morning, the wolf was gone. Only a damp towel, a few black hairs, and one small object remained near the blanket nest. Elara picked it up with trembling fingers. A black button, stamped with the royal crest of Stormfang. Far above, from the direction of the king's tower, a wounded wolf howl rose into the pale morning sky. By noon, Elara had hidden the royal button in 3 different places and trusted none of them. First, she tucked it beneath her pillow. Then she worried someone might change the bedding. After that, she placed it inside the chipped blue cup on her shelf, but the pear blossom plant leaned over it as if trying to look suspicious. Finally, she slipped it into the pocket of her apron and spent the entire morning walking as if the tiny button weighed as much as a crown. It was stamped with the Stormfang crest. Mr. Grumpy had either stolen from the royal laundry, eaten a nobleman, or carried secrets far larger than Elara's room. None of those options felt comforting. She was folding napkins in the servants' hall when Mrs. Alder appeared behind her. Elara Vale, the king requested you in the private library. The napkin slipped from Elara's hands. The king requested me? Yes. For library work? Mrs. Alder's expression sharpened. Did I say kitchen work? No, sorry. I was just checking in case the words became confused on their way to my ears. A nearby maid coughed into her sleeve, hiding a laugh. Elara followed the quiet corridor toward the royal library, with her pulse fluttering beneath her collarbone. Rain had left the palace washed in pale light. Through the tall windows, the gardens glistened, and water dripped from black branches like silver beads. The private library smelled of old paper, cedar wood, and firelight. Alpha King Kalen stood near a long table covered with maps. He wore a dark coat, perfectly formal, perfectly controlled. Nothing about him looked like a giant wolf who had judged her chair and accepted a towel under the name Mr. Grumpy. That should have reassured her. It did not. Miss Vale, he said. Elara curtsied carefully this time. She had practiced avoiding rugs. Your Majesty. His gaze flicked to her hands. Mrs. Alder said you are good with delicate work. Elara looked behind her before remembering she was the only Elara in the room. She said that? She said you repair things others throw away. Warmth touched her cheeks. That sounds more like me. Kalen gestured toward a stack of old books. Several bindings were damaged in the rain last week. I was told you could help. Elara approached the table, relieved to find something ordinary beneath all that royal attention. Books made sense. Torn covers did not stare with silver eyes. Then she noticed his right hand. A dark cut crossed his knuckles, half hidden beneath a black glove. You're bleeding, she said before. Fear could stop her. Salen stilled. Elara froze too. I mean, respectfully bleeding. For 1 second, silence filled the library. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Respectfully? I panicked. So I gathered. He removed the glove slowly. The wound was shallow but angry, with faint black lines spreading from it like burned veins. Elara's smile faded. That does not look normal. No, Kalen said quietly. It does not. She should have called a healer. She should have stepped back. Instead, She reached for the clean linen beside the books and dipped it into the basin of warm water. This may sting, she warned. Kaelin watched her with an unreadable expression. You say that like I am the sort of man who argues with cloth. Alara glanced up. I recently met a wolf who argued with a towel, so I no longer make assumptions. His eyes flashed silver. Only for a breath. Alara's fingers paused against his skin. The moment she touched him, warmth moved through both of them, soft and deep. The black lines around his wound faded slightly. Kaelin inhaled as if pain had loosened its grip for the first time in years. Alara did not understand what she had done. She only saw the exhaustion hidden beneath his control, the loneliness sitting quietly behind his crown. So she cleaned the wound gently. There, she whispered. Better. Kaelin looked at her hand on his, then at her face. Yes, he said, voice low. Much better. Outside the library doors, 2 guards approached. One whispered, His Majesty has not slept this peacefully in years. Alara's heart stumbled. Because in her pocket, the royal button suddenly felt warm. She spent the rest of the day trying not to stare at Alpha King Kaelin Blackthorn's buttons. This proved difficult because the king had many of them, all polished, black, and stamped with the same Stormfang crest as the one hidden in her apron pocket. She told herself there were reasonable explanations. Perhaps royal buttons fell everywhere. Perhaps wolves collected them. Perhaps the palace had a button problem no one discussed because it was too embarrassing for the crown. None of those thoughts helped. By evening, the rain had stopped, leaving Blackthorn Palace wrapped in mist. Lamps glowed along the corridors, soft and golden against the old stone walls. The air smelled of wet ivy, beeswax, and the faint sweetness of pear blossoms drifting from the greenhouse. Alara carried a tray of tea toward the private library, walking slowly so the cups would not rattle. She had been summoned again, officially to organize old correspondence. Unofficially, her heart had not been calm since noon. When she entered, Kaelin stood near the fireplace with one hand braced on the mantel. Firelight touched the sharp lines of his face and softened them just enough to reveal the tired man beneath the king. Miss Vale, he said. Your Majesty. She curtsied carefully, then glanced at the rug. Kaelin noticed. Still concerned it may attack? Alara looked up, startled. His mouth curved faintly. Her cheeks warmed. One can never be too careful around palace rugs. For a moment, something almost peaceful settled between them. Then, his sleeve shifted. Alara saw it clearly. One black button was missing from the cuff of his coat. Her fingers tightened around the tray. Kaelin's gaze dropped to the movement. Are you all right? Yes, she said too quickly. Completely, very normal, nothing button-related. Silence. Alara closed her eyes for half a second. Kaelin's expression changed, not amused exactly, but dangerously close. Button-related? She set the tray down before she could spill tea on royalty again. Slowly, she reached into her apron pocket and placed the button on the table. The tiny black crest caught the firelight. I found this in my room, she said softly, after the wolf left. Kaelin did not move, but his wolf did. Alara felt it before she understood it. The air warmed. The scent of cedar smoke and snow deepened around him. His silver eyes brightened, not cold now, but exposed. She swallowed. Mr. Grumpy is connected to you, isn't he? A quiet breath left him. Mr. Grumpy? Alara winced. That part was not meant for the king. Kaelin looked away, and this time there was no hiding the small smile that crossed his face. The sight struck her harder than his crown ever had. Then, the smile faded. Alara studied him carefully. The silver eyes, the missing button, the cedar smoke scent, the black wolf's crescent mark that had matched the old silver crest carved behind the throne. Her throat tightened. It was you, she whispered. Kaelin turned back to her. He stepped closer, slowly enough to let her move away. She did not. Yes, he said quietly. It was me. The room seemed to fall silent around those words. The fire cracked softly. Rainwater dripped somewhere beyond the windows. Alara stared at him, at the missing button, at the silver eyes she had seen in both man and wolf. Oh, she whispered. Then, because her thoughts were apparently determined to embarrass her forever, she added, I dried the Alpha King with my old towel. Kaelin's gaze softened. You helped me. I called you Mr. Grumpy. You were not wrong. A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. It trembled at the edges, but it was real. The scent between them grew warmer, pear blossom meeting cedar smoke, lavender folding into winter air. I did not mean to frighten you, he said. You didn't, Alara answered, then hesitated. Not as the wolf. His eyes searched hers. That truth seemed to touch something deep inside him. Before either could speak again, footsteps approached outside the library. Alara stepped back just as the doors opened. Lady Marceline Voss entered in a gown, the color of red wine, her smile sharp enough to cut silk. "Your Majesty," she said sweetly. Her gaze slid to Alara, then to the tea tray, then to Kaelin's coat. Marceline's nostrils flared. For one brief second, her polite expression cracked, because on the Alpha King's sleeve, beneath cedar smoke and royal fire, lingered the unmistakable scent of pear blossoms after rain. Marceline's eyes narrowed. "Pear blossoms," she whispered. So the dead bloodline finally bloomed. By the next morning, the palace had learned how to whisper Alara's name. It followed her through the laundry room, slipped between shelves in the pantry, and curled around corners before she reached them. Servants who had once forgotten her face now looked too quickly and looked away too late. A few smiled with curiosity. Others watched with the sharp little hunger of people who enjoyed a rumor more than bread. Alara tried to keep her chin steady. She had survived worse than whispers. Still, when she entered the servants' hall carrying a tray of small honey cakes, the room quieted so suddenly that one spoon clinked loudly against a bowl. One maid leaned toward another. "That is her. The one whose scent was on the king." Alara nearly walked into a pillar. She corrected her path at the last second and whispered, "Not today, pillar." Unfortunately, Lady Marceline Voss had chosen that exact moment to enter. She looked too elegant for the servants' hall, wrapped in dark red silk with pearls at her throat and cruelty polished into her smile. Behind her stood two noble ladies and one old council elder with pale eyes and a silver cane. "Alara Vale," Marceline said sweetly. Alara stopped. "My lady." Marceline's gaze moved over her plain gray dress, her apron, her flower-dusted sleeve. "How charming. The palace has become generous with its entertainment." The servants lowered their eyes. Alara held the tray carefully. Her hands trembled, but only a little. Marceline stepped closer. "Tell me, little maid, did you always plan to climb from the laundry room to the king's private library?" Alara's face warmed. "No, my lady, I was asked to repair books." "How innocent." Marceline leaned in, her perfume sharp with roses and frost. "And did you also repair His Majesty's coat with your scent?" "Oh." A few people gasped softly. Alara felt the words hit, but she did not let them knock her down. She had been small all her life, but small things could still stand. Candles did. Wildflowers did. The pear blossom plant in her room certainly did, and it was mostly surviving on stubbornness and poor lighting. "I did not place anything where it did not belong," Alara said quietly. Marceline's smile thinned. "Careful." Alara lowered her gaze, not in surrender, but to steady herself. "I am being careful, my lady." The tray shifted in her hands. One honey cake rolled off the edge. It bounced once, spun across the stone floor, and came to rest against a pair of polished black boots. The whole room froze. Alara closed her eyes. Of course. Alpha King Kaelin Blackthorn stood in the doorway. No guard had announced him. No trumpet had warned the room. He was simply there, tall and silent, dressed in black, silver eyes resting first on the fallen cake, then on Alara's pale face. For one terrible second, nobody breathed. Then, Kaelin bent down, picked up the honey cake, and placed it back on the tray with the care of a man returning something precious. "Miss Vale," he said calmly, "I believe this escaped." Alara stared at him. "Yes, Your Majesty, it has a bold spirit." A faint smile touched his mouth. The servant stared as if the moon had fallen into the soup. Kaelin turned to Marceline. The warmth vanished from his eyes. "Lady Voss," he said, "you will not question members of my household as though they are criminals." Marceline's cheeks colored. "Your Majesty, I was merely concerned." "No," Kaelin said softly, "you were cruel." The words landed with quiet force. Alara's throat tightened. No one had ever defended her like that in front of anyone. The old council elder near Marceline suddenly lifted his head, his pale eyes fixed on Alara. His nostrils flared once, then again. The silver cane trembled in his hand. "That scent," he whispered. Kaelin heard him. So did Marceline. Alara did not understand why the room had gone cold. The elder took one slow step back, fear and recognition crossing his wrinkled face. "Pear blossoms after rain," he breathed. "Moon-warm milk, lavender." Kaelin's expression darkened. The elder looked at Alara as though he had seen a ghost. "That girl," he whispered, "should have died 20 years ago." The words did not leave the servants' hall after the elder spoke them. They stayed. They hung above the honey cakes, the polished floor, the lowered heads of frightened servants, and Elara's small still figure beside the tray. For one long moment, even the palace seemed to stop breathing. That girl should have died 20 years ago. Elara stared at the old council elder, trying to understand how a stranger could sound so certain about her death. Kalen moved first. He stepped in front of her, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of a wall becoming a mountain. His black coat brushed her sleeve. The scent of cedar smoke and winter closed around her, steady and protective. "Explain yourself," he said. The elder's face had gone pale. "Your Majesty, I only meant—" "No." Kalen's voice lowered. "You meant exactly what you said." Marceline looked between them, her sharp smile slowly returning. How fascinating. A maid with a dead girl's scent. Elara's fingers tightened around the tray. One honey cake trembled dangerously near the edge. Kalen's eyes flashed silver. "Lady Voss, leave." Her smile vanished. "Your Majesty?" "Now." The command cracked through the room, like thunder wrapped in velvet. Marceline curtsied stiffly and swept out with her ladies behind her. The elder followed only after Kalen gave a single cold glance. When the door closed, the servants remained frozen. Kalen turned slightly toward Elara. "Come with me." She nodded because her voice had misplaced itself. They walked through a side corridor lined with rain-dark windows. Outside, the garden smelled of wet leaves and autumn earth. Elara held the tray without realizing she had never set it down. Kalen noticed. "Miss Vale." "Yes?" "You are still carrying the cakes." She looked down. "Oh." A pause. "Would you like to keep them?" Elara blinked at him. The Alpha King of Stormfang, who had just silenced half the palace, looked entirely serious. "I don't know," she whispered. "They have been through a lot." For the first time since the elder's words, Kalen's expression softened. "Then they deserve rest." That tiny bit of absurd kindness almost made her cry. In the private library, Kalen closed the door and finally faced her. Firelight glowed across the shelves, warm and gold, but his eyes remained storm-bright. "Elara," he said carefully, "do you remember anything from your childhood before the palace?" She sat near the table, the tray in her lap. "Only pieces." "What kind of pieces?" Her gaze drifted to the rain-streaked window. "Smoke, bells, a pear tree burning outside a window, someone running with me, a woman singing, but quietly, like she was afraid the walls could hear." She swallowed. "And silver fabric. A scarf, maybe, with a moon stitched into it." Kalen became very still. Elara gave a small, nervous laugh. "I also remember biting a man's hand when he tried to take it from me. I was little, so I assume it was not very impressive." "It may have been very impressive to the man." "That is kind of you to say." Kalen crossed to an old chest beneath the window and drew out a folded cloth. It was pale silver, carefully preserved. At its corner, a crescent moon had been embroidered in white thread. Elara's breath caught. The honey cakes slid sideways. Kalen caught the tray before disaster could claim them. Elara touched the scarf with trembling fingers. The moment her skin brushed the fabric, her scent bloomed through the room. Pear blossoms after rain, warm milk, lavender, and something older beneath it, silver and soft as moonlight. Kalen's wolf rose instantly. Not in hunger, in recognition. "Mine," the wolf whispered, "hurt, hidden, ours." Elara pressed the scarf to her chest as tears filled her eyes. "Why does it feel like home?" Kalen knelt before her, not as a king before a servant, but as a man before someone trembling at the edge of a forgotten truth. "Because I think you were born in Moonvale," he said. For most of her life, Elara had believed there was nothing special about her except the unusual amount of objects she could bump into before breakfast. But now, as she held the silver scarf, something deep inside her ached with the memory of a life someone had tried to erase. Outside, beyond the rain-silvered glass, a shadow moved between the greenhouse trees. Someone had followed her scent. By the time Elara reached the greenhouse later that evening, the rain had turned gentle again. It slid down the glass roof in silver lines, softening the world beyond the panes until the palace gardens looked like a watercolor painting left too close to tears. Inside, the air was warm and green. Damp soil, crushed leaves, old stone, and blooming pear blossoms wrapped around her like a memory she almost knew how to name. Elara held the silver scarf against her chest as she walked between the plants. Moonvale. The word had not stopped echoing inside her. She was so lost in thought that she nearly apologized to a fern after brushing its leaves. "Sorry," she whispered anyway, because some habits were stronger than dignity. A faint sound came from behind the orange trees. Elara turned. "Hello?" No one answered. Then a sweet, Sharp scent drifted through the greenhouse. Not flowers. Not rain. Something bitter beneath honey. Alara's fingers tightened around the scarf. Her head grew light so quickly that she reached for the nearest table and missed it entirely. "Oh," she breathed. "That is rude." The glass ceiling blurred above her. The last thing she saw was a dark figure slipping between the plants before the world folded into silence. Across the palace, Kalen stopped in the middle of a council meeting. One moment, Lord Heron was complaining about border taxes and insisting the kingdom needed a Luna with proper political blood. The next, the Alpha King's face went completely still. Kalen could no longer smell pear blossoms. The soft warmth that had lingered at the edge of his senses since the night he opened the wrong door simply vanished. His wolf surged so violently that the council table shook beneath his hand. Finned hair. Kalen was already moving. He crossed the corridor with a speed no servant dared question. Guards tried to follow, but by the time they reached the east wing, the king was gone. The black wolf hit the greenhouse doors like a storm made flesh. Wood cracked, hinges screamed. Glass trembled overhead. Alara lay beneath the pear blossom tree, pale and still, the silver scarf twisted in one hand, around her. Crushed white petals clung to her hair and sleeves, as if the tree itself had tried to hide her. The wolf froze. For one terrible heartbeat, he looked less like a king and more like a creature who had found his world too quiet. Then he lowered his massive head and nudged her cheek with impossible gentleness. Elara did not wake. A low sound broke from him, deep and wounded. When the palace healer arrived minutes later, he stopped at the doorway. "Your Majesty, I need space to examine." The wolf turned his silver gaze on him. The healer swallowed, a very small amount of space. Elara stirred faintly. Even unconscious, her brows pinched as if she disapproved of all the drama. The healer knelt carefully and opened a small vial beneath her nose. "Scent blocker," he said grimly. "Strong. Designed to mute Omega's scent." Kalen shifted back beside her before anyone could blink, one knee on the damp stone, dark coat half torn from the change. His face was calm in the way winter lakes were calm before they cracked. "Why would it work this fast?" he asked. The healer hesitated. It would not. Not unless her bloodline was rare. Kalen looked down at Alara. Her hand moved weakly. Without thinking, he took it. Her fingers curled around his thumb. The bond flickered, faint but alive. Elara's eyes opened just a little. "Did Mr. Grumpy break the greenhouse?" Kalen exhaled, relief cutting through him so sharply it almost hurt. "Yes." She blinked slowly. That was unnecessary. He disagreed. A tiny smile touched her lips before fading again. Near the broken door, a guard picked something from the wet floor. A red silk thread caught on a splinter of wood. Kalen saw it. So did the healer. Lady Marceline's gowns were always red. The trial of Alara Vale began beneath the tallest windows of Blackthorn Palace. Morning light poured into the great hall, cold and pale, touching the marble floor, the silver banners, and the faces of nobles who had gathered far too quickly. Whispers moved like thin smoke between them. Moonvale, Scent Blocker, the maid. Alara stood alone near the center of the hall in a simple blue dress Mrs. Alder had pressed with trembling hands. Her hair had been tied back neatly, though one soft curl had already escaped beside her cheek. She had tried to push it back 3 times. It returned every time, stubborn as hope. At the far end of the hall, Alpha King Kalen Blackthorn sat upon the blackstone throne. He looked calm, too calm. Only Alara noticed the way his fingers curled against the armrest, as if his wolf was pacing beneath his skin. Lady Marceline Voss stood before the council in red silk. Her face was pale but proud, her voice smooth enough to make poison sound like prayer. "This girl hid her bloodline inside the palace," Marceline said. "She carried the scent of Moonvale and concealed it from the crown. Who knows what danger she brought to His Majesty?" Lord Heron lifted his chin. "The kingdom cannot risk a maid influencing the Alpha King through scent. His Majesty must choose a Luna from proper noble blood, not from a servant's corridor." Elara's hands folded tightly in front of her. She was afraid, but she was tired of being treated like something small enough to step on. "I did not know," she said softly. A nobleman scoffed. "Convenient." Alara looked at him. Her voice remained quiet, but it did not break. "Yes, it would have been very convenient to know I was apparently supposed to be dead before everyone else started discussing it in hallways." A few servants near the back lowered their faces to hide startled smiles. Even Kalen's mouth almost moved. Marceline's eyes sharpened. "She mocks the council." "No," Elara said. "I am trying not to faint. Sometimes humor helps." The hall fell silent for one strange second. Then the old elder with the silver cane stepped forward. His gaze did not carry cruelty now, only fear. The moonlit healers were hunted because their scent could calm unstable alphas. Some believed they could control kings. Kalen rose from the throne. The sound of his boots against the marble ended every whisper. "She has controlled nothing," he said. Marceline turned quickly. "Your Majesty, your judgment is compromised." Kalen descended the steps slowly. "My judgment became clear the night someone tried to erase her scent." His eyes moved to the red thread held by a guard near the council table. Marceline's expression tightened. Kalen stopped beside Alara. Not above her. Beside her. A breath moved through the hall as every wolf present understood the meaning of that choice. Alara looked up at him, startled. "Your Majesty, you do not have to." "I do," he said quietly. The scent of cedar smoke wrapped around her. Her own scent answered before she could stop it, faint but returning. Pear blossoms after rain, warm milk, lavender, and moonlight hidden beneath all three. Kalen's eyes flashed silver. Pain crossed his face for half a second. Then his body changed. The black wolf erupted into the hall, enormous and silent, with silver eyes and a white crescent across his chest. Nobles stumbled back. A few gasped. One councilman dropped his papers. Alara, however, only looked at the wolf's claws on the royal carpet. "Mr. Grumpy," she whispered, horrified. "Please do not ruin that. It looks expensive." The wolf paused. Then, very carefully, he lifted one paw off the delicate embroidery. A servant made a strangled sound that might have been laughter. The black wolf stepped in front of Alara, placing his massive body between her and the council. His growl was low, not wild, but absolute. A silver warmth bloomed around Alara's wrist. She looked down. A matching glow circled Kalen's front paw, bright as moon thread. The mate bond. The hall saw it. Marceline went white. The wolf shifted back into the king, still standing before Alara like a shield carved from storm and fire. Kalen's voice filled the hall. "Touch her, and you answer to your king." His silver eyes darkened with ancient instinct. "And my wolf." The great hall did not move after Kalen's words. Even the candles seemed to burn more carefully. Alara stood behind him with the silver glow still circling her wrist, soft and warm against her skin. For most of her life, she had been the girl people forgot in corners, the maid with flower on her sleeve, the Omega who apologized to furniture when no one was listening. Now every noble in Stormfang Kingdom stared at her, as if the moon itself had stepped into a servant's dress. Lady Marceline tried to speak first. "This proves nothing." Kalen looked at her. That was enough to make her voice disappear. The guard stepped forward and held up the red silk thread. "This was found on the broken greenhouse door, Your Majesty." Another maid, shaking but brave, lowered her head. Lady Voss entered the east corridor before Miss Vale collapsed. "I saw her." Marceline's face hardened. A servant's word means nothing. Alara's chin lifted slightly. Once, that sentence would have folded her inward. This time, it did not. Kalen's voice turned colder than the winter mountains. "In my hall, every truthful word matters." The council elder bowed his head. The scent blocker used against her was forbidden. If Lady Voss ordered it, she broke crown law. Marceline looked around, searching for allies. She found only silence. By sunset, her title had been stripped, her family removed from council influence, and she was sent from Blackthorn Palace under guard. Alara did not watch her leave. There was no sweetness in seeing someone fall. Only relief that, for once, cruelty had not been allowed to dress itself as nobility. That night, rain returned to the palace. Not the hard rain of fear, but a gentle silver rain that washed the windows and softened the dark gardens. In the old greenhouse, pear blossoms opened beneath the moon, as if they had been waiting 20 years for permission. Alara stood beneath the glass roof, the silver moonveil scarf wrapped around her shoulders. Kalen stood before her, his black coat damp at the edges, his silver eyes quieter than she had ever seen them. "The curse is stronger tonight," she said softly. He gave a faint smile. "You say that as if you plan to scold it." "I might. It has been very rude to you." The corner of his mouth curved. Then pain crossed his face, brief but sharp. Black veins spread over his hand, crawling toward his wrist like burned roots. Alara stepped closer before fear could stop her. Kalen's voice lowered. "You do not have to do this." She looked up at him. "You stood in front of a whole kingdom for me. I can stand in front of one grumpy curse." His laugh was quiet, almost broken. She took his hand. The mate bond answered instantly. Silver light bloomed between their palms, warm as candlelight, soft as breath. Alara's scent filled the greenhouse, pear blossoms after rain, lavender soap, honeyed milk, and moonlight older than memory. Kalen's cedar smoke and winter fire wrapped around it, not swallowing, not overpowering, only coming home. The black veins faded. Kalen closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the wolf inside him stopped fighting. Alara saw flashes through the bond, a lonely king walking empty corridors, a black wolf howling beneath storm clouds, a man carrying a crown that had never once held him back. Kalen saw her too, a little girl wrapped in silver cloth, a maid laughing softly at spilled tea, an Omega who had been called small and still chose kindness every time. When the light faded, his hand was clean. Alara blinked quickly. Did it work? Kalen looked at her as if Sunrise had learned her name. Yes, he whispered. It worked. Days later, the palace gathered again, but this time no one stood in accusation. Alara walked beside Kalen through the great hall, dressed in soft silver, with one stubborn curl already escaping its pins. Kalen noticed. Your hair is rebelling. It has political opinions. A smile moved through the servants behind them. When the kingdom bowed to its future Luna, Alara did not lower her eyes. That evening, Kalen took her back to the little room beside the greenhouse where everything had begun. The pear blossom plant sat on the windowsill, still leaning bravely toward the light. Alara touched one leaf. Can a Luna keep a plant with poor posture? Kalen stood behind her, his arms gentle around her waist. A Luna may keep the entire greenhouse if she wishes. Outside, the black wolf rested by the door, peaceful at last. Kalen pressed a kiss to her hair and whispered, I did not find a queen. I found home. So, this is where Alara and Kalen's story finally grows quiet. The rain has softened, the wolf has stopped fighting, and the girl who once apologized to furniture is now standing with her head lifted. Are you still here with me? Because if you are, maybe this story touched a place most people don't talk about. That place where you were betrayed, misunderstood, judged before anyone bothered to know your heart. Alara was hurt, but she did not beg to be believed. She did not chase people who wanted to shrink her. She kept her kindness, but she also learned to protect her peace. That is not weakness. That is dignity. Life will not always explain you to the people committed to misunderstanding you. A calm heart may look small in a loud room, but it is often the strongest thing there. When respect is missing, stepping away is not losing. It is choosing yourself before bitterness teaches you to become someone you never wanted to be. If this story stayed with you, comment one word, Dignity. And if you enjoyed it, a gentle like, share, and subscribe would mean more than you know.